Homage to the Triple Gem. So, hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe, and this is actually the third try recording this video. The first two tries, although I had my microphone plugged in for reasons I don't know, the audio didn't record. But now I have a backup and recording this on an audio app and have got the microphone plugged in, so I'm hoping that this one goes, and if it's up on YouTube it will mean it's successful. So was asked a question at a panel discussion that was posed to basically everybody in the panel in Australia about a month ago or so. And the panel discussion we were having was on right effort. So a lot of the discussion had been going around how ease was important in the practice, and the facilitator asked if there was any role for more of the rigorous forms of practice that we see in the canon, or more intense applications of effort. So I thought that the topic was an interesting one, basically discussing effort versus ease in practice. When we think about effort in practice, there's a couple things to consider. One is where our efforts are leading in terms of what our lifestyle will look like. And another is on the ground, what are we doing in terms of our application of effort to get us there. So when we look in the canon, when we look at the lives of the noble disciples, of the arahants who are monks, and the noble disciples who are lay people in ancient times, and also look at them in modern times, there's a remarkable overlap in terms of the way that their lifestyle looks. And when we look in the canon and see the way that the Buddha describes the ideal lifestyle for a monk, it essentially involves resorting to a secluded dwelling and basically spending almost the entire day meditating, sleeping 4 hours, going on pindapata, coming back to the kuti, returning to the same place, and continuing meditation. Now, of course, there's variability in that lifestyle. Monks would wander, but we get the sense that a person who is devoting their time in such a way that it's leading to the highest goals is basically spending most of their time meditating. And when we see how they're engaging in speech, their speech is very little. It's kind of the ideal that's given in the Vinaya is that even if two monks return from alms round and need to move water, they shouldn't break out into speech for that purpose. They should make a motion with their hand, and then through these kind of hand gestures move the water. So you get this sense of people, even when they're living in a community, it's like they're living alone, kind of living together alone, and applying themselves very intently to meditation. So that's the ideal that's laid out in the canon. When we look at the lives of the Thai forest masters, the monks in the Thai forest tradition who are widely believed to have attained arahantship, we see a remarkable overlap. Sleeping very little, spending most of their day in meditation, wandering, living in secluded locations. So when we think about this level of effort and what their lifestyle is like, it's pretty intense and very inspiring. And we can roughly compare it to the level of skill that one would develop, say, to become an Olympic athlete. Now, obviously, it's kind of the different skill sets, but the intensity of application of effort, the dedication, and the quality of the performance is kind of comparable to Olympic level skill, Olympic level performance, Olympic level dedication. So this is where our efforts are leading us to a lifestyle, to an application of effort that's essentially like that. It's kind of a lifestyle and application of effort that is unrelenting, that's constant, and that's capable of uprooting the deepest defilements. So when we look at an example like that, it can be like, whoa, how do you get there from zero? And again, can consider what it's like for people who come to train in athletics. So I was watching a video clip or something. I can't remember how I saw it. I think I was passing by a TV, maybe in Canada, a couple years ago when they had the Olympics on. And there was this Olympic athlete, and she was a world famous gymnast. They said she was the best gymnast ever or something. And there were these two bars. One was really high, and the next was lower. And she was doing these practice runs where she was like swinging around the top bar and then doing several flips and grabbing onto the lower bar. It was kind of after flying through the air and grabbing onto this thing while flipping around. So you wouldn't want to just walk into a gymnasium and hop onto the higher bar and try to imitate what that person did. I mean, you may succeed if you've never had any training, but it's a pretty small chance and a much higher chance that you'll injure yourself or do something quite wrong. Injury is pretty likely trying to do flips around in that way. But when we think about what the process that person must have had to go through to develop that level of skill, they wouldn't have started jumping onto this high bar, doing several flips around and, landing and doing one of these flourishes that you see gymnasts do at the end. It would have started likely as a very small child, learning to do a front roll or, learning whatever the very basic skills of gymnastics are. And as they develop these very basic skills over a period of time, then the elements that they needed to concentrate on quite a lot at the beginning become second nature. And they can direct their attention to refining their skill ever more, to refining their performance ever more. So in a similar way, the Buddhist training is gradual in the sense that it starts from these basic skills that we develop. We use our efforts in order to develop them, but they become more and more second nature the more that we apply our minds to them. And they can deteriorate if we don't apply our minds to them. So when we see the monks who are living this lifestyle, it doesn't mean that for them they're engaged in this constant, that they're engaged in a constant, intense application of effort that would be completely unsustainable. It's sustainable because they've developed it by degrees over a long period, and so their experience of putting forth that level of effort is different than somebody who would just started. So step by step, our lifestyle needs to begin to change and will change the more that we adopt the Buddhist teachings and the more that we put them into practice. So coming to the second portion, on the ground, how does that look in terms of effort versus ease? So one of the things is that there are some defilements that are responsive to effort. We might call it responsive to exerting a fabrication. And there's other defilements that are responsive to developing mind states that are more relaxed, maybe more expansive, more non-reactive. So, for example, there's certain types of anxiety that are fueled by attempts to think or attempts to put forth effort. And probably anxiety and fear and worry and stress that comes as a result of those things, that all those emotions can sometimes be bundled under stress. Those can sometimes be byproducts that build up in the system gradually as a result of one putting forth efforts to meet deadlines, to achieve goals, to do things at a particular pace, at a particular performance level that matches or exceeds competitors so that one can stay afloat. That constant application of effort in that way can gradually build up a byproduct of anxiety and of fear and of worry that one will not meet the goal and will suffer the consequences of not meeting it. So for a lot of people who've grown up in this system, it's not like it's a terrible system. There's a lot of good things about it actually, but all qualities, essentially all qualities except for heedfulness, need to be balanced. And so effort as well sometimes needs to be balanced. And when these qualities build up in the mind, then anxiety can be associated with any application of effort. So for this reason, what you sometimes get is Westerners, or people growing up in a Western, people who grew up in a culture that has this system in place, which is many places around the world now. And when they come to meditation, they don't want to hear anything about putting forth effort, because putting forth effort is associated with stress, associated with anxiety. So if anxiety and stress and worry are a big factor in a person's life, then focusing more on the qualities that bring ease or contentment, the perceptions that make it seem that there's no need to do anything, can be a valuable counterbalance to that mind state. That mind state is one that has tripped the mind and taken it into a place where it's not healthy, where it's not where it's not developing in a way that's balanced. So Ajahn Chah is a very good simile, and the simile is of a man walking down a road. And the road has a ditch on the left side and a ditch on the right side. And if the man veers too far to the left, he falls in the left-hand ditch. If he veers too far to the right, he falls in the right-hand ditch. So Ajahn Chah gave that simile because one time somebody asked him, or criticized him perhaps, for giving conflicting advice. Put forth a lot of effort maybe, or don't put forth that much effort. And sometimes the advice that he would give to foreigners would seem quite different than the advice that he would give to Thai monks. And so what we see in the application of effort is that it requires this balance, and that balance depends on the defilement that's arising in the mind. Now, an important thing to know is that even bringing up a perception like, okay, everything is fine, there's nothing that I need to really do, which can be helpful in some ways when anxiety arises. Kind of this feeling of anxiety arises, and one decides that one's just going to watch it. One won't actively engage in trying to get rid of it, which will fuel anxiety, but just watch it and not let it kind of get its hooks into the mind. Sometimes the way that these defilements can arise is they kind of hook the mind and then pull it. So it's just kind of watching it and not letting it hook into the mind and pull it off. So in doing that, sometimes some of the bases for the anxiety arising can fall away once they've expended their momentum. And then one can feel ease and relaxation as a result of that, and a lot more mental clarity. So there can be this application of perceptions that get rid of negative emotions like anxiety or fear or worry. But it's important to know that that's not like a non-doing. I mean, we're doing something there. It's just a change in where the dial is set and in what it's set to, what you're trying to tune into. So the word for a monk in the Pali Canon is samana, and samana actually means somebody who's in tune. So you get this sense of somebody who's balancing things out. So there's this very famous sutta with Venerable Sona. Venerable Sona ordained in a southern country far away from Magadha, where the Buddha was living and teaching. And he went to see the Buddha and eventually decided to go strive on his own. And he put forth a lot of effort in his meditation, so much so that his feet split open and there was blood on his meditation path. So he was thinking to himself, of all the Buddha's disciples who have effort, I'm one, and yet my mind isn't liberated from the taints. What if I were to disrobe? And then the Buddha knew the thought in his mind and suddenly appeared in front of him. So there's a teacher who I really respect, and when he tells that story from that sutta, he often says, imagine what that would be like. You're just thinking to yourself, maybe I should disrobe, and then there's the Buddha's right in front of you. So he asks him, he says, were you thinking of disrobing? And Venerable Sona says, yes. And the Buddha says, when you were a layman, did you ever play the lute, kind of the vina? And he says, yes, I did. And the Buddha says, if your strings were too tight, then would the lute produce a good sound? No. If they were too loose, would it produce a good sound? No. And so the Buddha says, in the same way, basically overly applied effort leads to restlessness. Under applied effort leads to kind of sloth and torpor. But when you should tune your faculties to your effort and there pick up your theme. So here, apparently one of those instruments might have had 5 strings. And the way that you would tune an instrument in those days, apparently, like tuning a guitar, was you would tune one string and then set the other string so that they sounded in tune with that one string. So whatever the appropriate application of effort is in a particular situation, you want to use your other faculties to balance out the mind in that case. So if the appropriate application of effort in terms of the amount of force or the amount of energy that one is putting into a situation needs to be tuned a little bit lower, then one can increase the amount of concentration that one tries to put into the situation, the amount of faith that one tries to put into the situation, and thereby balance the faculties, tune them around the faculty of effort, so that everything feels balanced in such a way that the defilement is eliminated. What that can feel like on the ground is just basically trying out perceptions, trying out applications of effort in terms of turning the dial, how much focus, how little, how broad, how narrow, all these variables, until it feels right and until this defilement is countered effectively by the combination that one's come up with. So that's essentially bringing things in tune, and they can sometimes need to be tuned to a level of effort that's more calm, that's more conducive to relaxation, that's more conducive to non-worry, that's more conducive to stillness. There's also times when one wants to tune one's level of effort up, and the faculties up, to a higher pitch, to a pitch that's more active. And sometimes that can be the case even with an emotion like anxiety, one wants to think about the causes of the worry. Other times it can be the case with things like being at an impasse in one's practice. Just doubt has arisen about where one should go. In this case, sometimes one wants to actually do an active investigation. Where's the doubt coming from? And then see if through this kind of investigation one can pinpoint where the doubt is coming from and then eliminate it. This is especially the case if one is doubtful about doctrinal matters, doubtful about teachings that one has heard. Then that sometimes requires a more active application of effort and investigation, both in terms of the books and in terms of the way that it plays out in one's own practice. It requires this faculty of investigation. Sometimes there's going to be cases as well where both qualities of effort and ease need to be brought together in ways that can sometimes be a bit paradoxical. And this can be the case, for example, in situations where one feels that one should renounce something but is afraid to. So sometimes trying to ramp up and I'm just going to jump straight through it can actually bring up fear more. And kind of, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Why am I just going to go and rush off a cliff? Kind of just going with the flow can also sometimes sweep the mind into the current of the defilements. Well, I'll just go along with what I'm doing now. And so it's sometimes something that one needs to use both of these qualities in one's practice for. In terms of effort, kind of investigating, why is it that I think that I should renounce this? Why is this intuition perhaps arose that this is something that I should let go? And then seeing what the reason that the mind gives for it and seeing if it's a good one. And then comparing it to other times in the past when one has followed that intuition, when one has renounced things that the Buddha has said one should renounce. And if that has opened up things in one's practice afterwards. So that active faculty can be tuned in such a way that it can help one to get that impasse, past that impasse. And in terms of the faculty of ease, then one can also try to generate faith in the Buddha, and also through thinking about these things in the past, where has this led in the past, and generate a kind of faith about where it will lead in the future. And kind of one looks back at the momentum of one's practice over the course of one's life, or however long one has been practicing it, has it only led to good things when I've applied it properly? And if so, although this next step seems frightening, seems uncertain, taking it is something that I should do because it's going to lead to more benefits. One can also try to relax the mind in various ways through staying in the present moment and just taking whatever the next step is. Step by step isn't the right word, maybe inch by inch, we go toe length by toe length, kind of breaking that into smaller pieces and just allowing oneself to go forward in that way. So both of these strategies, sometimes both of these qualities and strategies that employ these qualities sometimes have to be brought together for defilements that are more complicated, for situations that require more than just a brute force effort application of will, or just more than just watching. Sometimes situations in which one has to make important decisions, but doesn't know what the right way forward is. So there can also be times when the application of effort needs to be done in a very intense way in situations where it shouldn't seem intense, or in which one thinks that one shouldn't put forth effort in an intense way. And this can sometimes be the case in one's practice when one has been meditating and trying to counter a particular defilement for a long time and has had some successes, some failures, some successes, some failures. There can sometimes be the case when just intuitively, past a certain point, one just feels like enough is enough. I'm throwing the gloves down and, basically win, lose, or draw, kind of life or death, wherever this leads me, I'm just going to be putting forth intense effort to stop this defilement right now. And at those times, the mind sometimes throws up all kinds of images, all kinds of ideas about why it's going to be a failure, about why one doesn't have the energy to sustain that level of effort, but one still needs to continue on with it. So there's this scene in the movie The Matrix, which I sometimes reference and probably shows how old I am, in which the lead character has been running away from these, they call them agents, these kind of like robots who were super good at everything and like super strong, super good at martial arts, super intelligent, had all these superpowers in this fictional version of reality that they were all living in called The Matrix. So the advice was always to run away from them because they were much stronger than any human. And there's this point in the movie which Neo, kind of the main character, goes into a subway, or he's in a subway and he meets up with an agent. I can't remember how they get into the subway, but he's looking behind him and there's an exit that he could run out of. And then the agent's in front of him. And he turns towards the exit and then turns towards the agent and decides to stand and fight. So he has this kind of big all-out battle with the with the agent. And it's a good metaphor for spiritual practice because there's points in which one's practice actually builds, and the battle lines between oneself and a defilement that's plaguing the mind keep shifting forwards and backwards, and eventually it becomes clear that one needs to get into this situation in which it's an intense all-out melee in which either one side or the other is basically going to win in that engagement. One of the really unusual things about defilements is that just like engagements with humans or physical enemies, army to army, nation to nation, there can be times when two nations or two people, two armies are locked in combat. And it seems like the opponent is just so strong that they might never break. But if one doesn't give up, then sometimes the way that those things break can be very sudden. You think about the way that the Russian Empire collapsed in the 90s, or think about the way that the Nazi Empire collapsed in World War II. It was kind of just a year before. They seemed invincible. So there are these times when this intense application of effort is necessary. And when one applies this intense application of effort in one's practice, just deciding that no matter what happens, I've kind of been locked in battle with this defilement for long enough, and now's the time to stand my ground. There can be times when it actually dissolves away at that time in such a way that it doesn't really arise in the same way again. So there are various times and various ways in which one needs to tune the mind to the situation at hand, tune one's level of effort, tune the faculties to the situation at hand, in ways that may be counterintuitive or in ways which may be completely obvious. But one thing that's the case in trying to build up our skill to the level of Olympic-like performance that the great monks of the past and the present have had, is that the middle way between effort and ease is not the middle of the pillow. That's what Longtang Mahabua sometimes describes it as. It's essentially what's effective. It's what works to eliminate the defilements that are plaguing us. That's what the middle way is here, and that's what will tell us if our balance of effort and ease, if the tuning of these two polar qualities, you might call them, is working, if it's right, if it's effective at eliminating the things that are plaguing us. So gradually, as we go forward in removing the negative qualities from our mind, it will require a change in our lifestyle. So it's not just something that happens on the cushion. It spreads out into everything that we do, everything that we think, everything that we speak, everything that we act upon. And as a result, our life will have to change bit by bit by bit until it becomes more and more similar to the ideal that the Buddha has laid out. But this is something that's possible for anybody to do step by step, basically. It's kind of anybody who has the right karma, you could say, it doesn't have a severe karmic block in this lifetime, but in theory, anybody over a longer stretch of time can do this. It's not limited to the great arahants of the past. Everybody has the capacity in terms of their ability to train their minds, in terms of the faculties that they have in general, to reach the same levels of excellence that the arahants have. And so step by step, as we work to eliminate our defilements, we're moving in that direction. And so it's not necessary to think of effort in terms of like something that's just always going to be negative, building up these byproducts of anxiety and worry and fear. When it's tuned rightly, it brings us to can bring one to higher and higher levels of excellence, such that one can perform at an Olympic level somewhat subconsciously and have the remaining energy and attention that's in the mind applied to bring that to higher and higher levels of skill. Because skill in the Dhamma builds and it culminates for the sake of eliminating defilements. And it builds and culminates in such a way that it can essentially self-destruct. So we put forth effort in order to find something that doesn't require any effort to maintain. And so long as we're tuning the faculties, so long as we're moving forward step by step, and so long as we don't quit, so long as we don't stop, that's a goal that we can reach. So long as we practice well, that's something that is a potential for everybody, given the general faculties that they have, to achieve nibbana and the end of suffering.